It was just another quiet, serene morning in the sleepy neighborhood. The sun was breaking over the horizon, casting golden hues through the trees. The air was crisp, almost healing, with the scent of dew lingering on the grass. Birds sang their familiar songs. The faint rustle of the leaves added a rhythm to the day, and a gentle breeze danced through the branches. Everything felt perfectly ordinary until it didn't. Max, a golden retriever, bounded along the sidewalk, his tail wagging energetically. His paws left little prints in the soft dirt, each step full of life, each breath full of excitement. His owner, Sarah, walked beside him, humming a soft tune. The morning walk was their ritual, one that had lasted for years. They had been through so much together. Sarah had raised Max from a tiny puppy, and now, years later, they were still best friends, still inseparable. With each step, the world seemed to move around them, but nothing mattered more than this simple, peaceful moment. Sarah smiled down at Max. His golden fur glistened in the morning light, and his eyes sparkled with joy. He was always so full of life, so ready for every adventure. They had their routines. Max's favorite game, the way he would nudge her hand when he wanted attention, the way his ears perked up whenever he heard a car pull into the driveway. They had been through the highs and lows together, and now on this quiet morning, everything felt calm and right. But everything changed with a single phone call. Sarah's phone rang as they continued their walk. She glanced at the screen, noticing the unfamiliar number. A sense of unease stirred in her chest, but she answered anyway. "Hello?" Sarah's voice was calm, a little distracted as she tried to focus on Max, who was tugging at the leash, eager to keep moving. "Ms. Davidson?" The voice on the other end was distant, almost formal. "This is the emergency room. I'm afraid we have bad news." Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. She had been through her share of tough moments, but nothing in her experience prepared her for what was coming next. The voice continued, telling her about the accident, how her husband Adam had been involved in a crash. Her hands shook as she gripped the phone tighter, trying to make sense of what was being said. A patch of black ice, a car spinning out of control, a moment of chaos that had ended with Adam in critical condition. Before Sarah could speak, the voice from the other end delivered the blow. "I'm sorry, but your husband didn't survive the accident." The world seemed to stop. The sounds around her faded, and the weight of the words pressed down on her chest. She didn't know how to breathe, how to process the information. Max, sensing the sudden shift in her mood, stopped tugging at the leash and walked closer to her, nuzzling his head against her leg as if to comfort her. But nothing could comfort her now. She felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her, and all she could do was stand there numb in the midst of the morning. She hung up the phone, but the cold grip of disbelief held her tight. Max looked up at her, his big brown eyes full of concern, his tail slightly drooping. He nudged her hand with his nose, a soft whimper escaping his throat. "Adam," Sarah whispered, her voice barely a breath. The words didn't seem real. How could they? Just hours ago, everything had been fine. Adam had kissed her goodbye, telling her he'd be back in time for dinner. How could everything change so quickly, so completely? Max sat down beside her, his head resting gently against her leg, as though he knew. He didn't understand the details, but he understood the sadness, the loss. Sarah looked down at him, her eyes brimming with tears, but there was nothing to say. What could she say? The hours that followed were a blur. Sarah couldn't bring herself to tell Max the news. How could she explain it to him? How could she put into words that the person who had been the center of their little world was now gone? The house felt empty, even though it was full of reminders of Adam, his favorite chair, the coffee cups they used every morning, the photographs of the two of them smiling together. Max stayed close to her, as he always did, but today he seemed different. His usual energetic self had quieted, and his eyes were filled with a deep, unsettling concern. He refused to leave her side, not even to eat or play. It was as though he knew something had been ripped from their world. By evening, Sarah was exhausted from the emotional toll of the day, but the weight of grief refused to let her rest. She sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Max, ever loyal, curled up beside her, his head resting in her lap. His warmth was a small comfort, but even that seemed distant. She stroked his fur, the gentle motions almost mechanical, but she couldn't help but feel the loss of everything that had once been. Adam was gone, and now in this quiet house. It seemed that even Max's presence couldn't fill the void. Then without warning, Max whimpered. It was a soft, plaintive sound that made Sarah freeze. She looked down at him, and her heart stopped. He was trembling, his body shuddering with a fear she had never seen before. "Max? What's wrong, boy?" she whispered, her voice full of concern. Max didn't respond. His eyes, usually full of warmth and energy, were now clouded with confusion. He struggled to lift his head, but his body seemed weak. His breath came in shallow bursts, each one more labored than the last. "Oh, no, no." Sarah's voice cracked, her throat tight with panic. She reached for him, trying to comfort him, but Max's condition was worsening too quickly. He collapsed onto the floor with a soft thud, his body curling slightly as if trying to find some sort of relief. Sarah's heart raced as she scrambled to pick him up, but it was clear something was terribly wrong. She felt the coldness of his body, the rapid, uneven breaths. Tears sprang to her eyes as she called the emergency vet, but the truth was already sinking in. Max, her constant companion, her friend, was slipping away. The car ride to the clinic was a blur, Sarah's mind unable to focus on anything except the image of Max's trembling form in her arms. How could this happen? How could she be losing him, too? At the clinic, the doctors worked quickly, trying to stabilize Max, but Sarah could see the truth in their eyes. There was nothing they could do. His time had come. She knelt beside him, her hands gently stroking his fur as he lay on the cold table. "Please, Max, please don't go. Please stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with something that Sarah couldn't quite place: understanding, love, and perhaps an apology. In that brief, quiet moment, it was as if he was telling her that everything would be okay. But it wasn't. Not yet. Not ever. With a final, slow breath, Max's head rested gently against her hand. His eyes fluttered close, and he was gone. The room seemed to go still, as if time itself had stopped. Sarah felt the weight of the loss settle over her like a heavy blanket. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could everything be ripped away from her so suddenly? She had no words, no tears left to shed. It was as if her body was refusing to feel anymore, but the emptiness inside her was suffocating. Hours later, Sarah returned home, but it felt like a different place entirely. The walls, the furniture, even the quiet space she had once shared with Max now seemed foreign. She sank into the couch, staring at the collar Max had worn for so many years. It was lying on the floor, as if he had left it behind in the final moments of his life. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the leather, the metal tag that had been his for so long. And for the first time in hours, Sarah smiled through her tears. She thought of all the mornings they had shared, all the walks, all the little moments. Max had been more than a dog. He had been family, and in his own way, he had loved her just as much as she had loved him. With a deep, shaky breath, Sarah stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the night. She knew the pain would never completely go away, but she also knew that Max had left her with something precious, the memory of a love that would never fade. As the tears began to fall again, Sarah whispered to the night, "Goodbye, Max. I'll never forget you." And somewhere, in the quiet of the house, the collar lay next to her, a small reminder of everything they had shared.